The story of David and Goliath is one of the most well-known passages in the Bible, yet it is far more than just a tale of a boy defeating a giant. It is a story of fear and courage, weakness and strength, despair and hope. Most importantly, it is a story of faith, the kind of faith that trusts God completely, even when the odds seem impossible. Our story begins in the land of Israel, during a time of war. The Israelites, God's chosen people, were facing their old enemies, the Philistines. These two nations had battled many times before, but now they stood locked in a standoff. The Philistines had gathered their forces and camped on one hill, while the Israelites set up camp on another. Between them lay the wide valley of Elah, a dry and dusty battleground where the outcome of the war would be decided. For 40 days a strange and frightening pattern repeated itself. Every morning and every evening a warrior stepped forward from the Philistine camp. He was no ordinary soldier. His name was Goliath, and he was a giant. Standing nearly 10 feet tall, he towered above the tallest men of Israel. His armor glistened in the sun, made of bronze that covered him from head to foot. The weight of his coat alone was more than 100 pounds. The shaft of his spear was as thick as a man's arm, and the iron tip itself weighed 15 pounds. To the soldiers of Israel, he seemed unstoppable, an invincible champion. Day after day, Goliath's voice thundered across the valley. His challenge was simple, but terrifying. Why line up for battle? Choose one man to fight me. If he wins, we will be your servants, but if I win, you will be ours. His words echoed through the hills, carried by the morning wind. Instead of filling Israel's men with courage, his challenge filled them with dread. No one dared to answer. The bravest warriors stayed silent. Even King Saul, who stood taller than anyone else in Israel, remained in his tent, unwilling to face the giant. Fear had taken hold of the entire army. While all this was happening on the battlefield, life continued in the hills of Bethlehem. There, a young shepherd named David tended his father's sheep. David was the youngest of 8 sons, the overlooked one in his family. His older brothers had followed Saul into battle, but David's duty was to care for the flock. Though he was young, David had already proven himself brave. When wild animals attacked the sheep, David defended them with courage. He had faced lions and bears, and had trusted God to give him victory. One day, Jesse, David's father, called him in from the fields. Jesse prepared bread, roasted grain, and cheese, and asked David to deliver them to his brothers at the battlefield. David was also instructed to bring back news of how they were doing. Obediently, David rose early the next morning, left the sheep with a caretaker, and set out on the journey to the valley of Elah. When David arrived, the Israelite camp was alive with noise. Trumpets sounded, men strapped on armor, and the army marched to their positions, shouting battle cries that echoed through the hills. The scene looked impressive, yet beneath the surface, fear still ruled their hearts. As David greeted his brothers and delivered the food, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The shouting died down, and all eyes turned toward the valley. Once again the giant Goliath stepped forward. His voice boomed, his armor clanged, and his threats carried across the battlefield. As he mocked the Israelites and their God, the men of Israel trembled and drew back. David watched in shock. He could not believe that the armies of the living God were shrinking before this Philistine. He asked the men nearby what would be done for the one who killed the giant. They told him that King Saul would give great wealth, his daughter in marriage, and freedom from taxes for the family of the man who defeated Goliath. But the rewards did not interest David as much as the insult itself. To him, the real issue was clear. How could anyone defy the armies of God and go unchallenged? David's boldness caught the attention of others, but not everyone was impressed. His oldest brother, Eliab, burned with anger. He accused David of arrogance and curiosity, telling him to go back to his sheep. But David insisted that he was simply speaking up for the honor of God. His words soon reached King Saul, and the boy was brought before him. When Saul saw David, he was doubtful. David was still young, with no battle experience. Goliath had been a warrior from his youth. Yet David spoke with confidence. He explained how he had fought lions and bears while guarding his father's sheep. Whenever one came to take a lamb, he pursued it, struck it, and rescued the lamb. David declared that the Lord who had saved him from the paw of the lion and the bear would also deliver him from this Philistine. Saul listened, amazed by the courage in David's voice. He finally agreed and said, "Go, and the Lord be with you." To prepare David for battle, Saul dressed him in his own royal armor. But the armor was far too heavy. David tried to walk, but could barely move. Gently he removed it all. He would not fight with weapons he did not know. Instead, David chose what was familiar. With his shepherd's staff in hand, he went down to the stream and carefully chose 5 smooth stones, placing them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag. With only his sling, he stepped forward toward the valley. As David approached, the armies on both sides watched in silence. The giant moved closer, and when he saw David, he laughed. To him, David looked like nothing more than a boy carrying sticks. Goliath cursed him, mocking him before the soldiers. But David was not shaken. He answered boldly, declaring that while Goliath came with sword, spear, and javelin, he came in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel. David proclaimed that the Lord would deliver Goliath into his hand, and that all the earth would know there was a God in Israel. The tension in the valley was thick. Every soldier held his breath. Goliath advanced, ready to crush the boy who dared to challenge him. But David did not wait. He ran quickly toward the battle line. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out a stone and placed it in his sling. With practiced skill, he swung it round and round, then released it. The stone flew straight and true, striking the giant on the forehead. The sound was sharp, like stone striking metal, and then silence followed. The giant's massive body swayed, then toppled forward to the ground with a thunderous crash. Dust rose into the air. The Philistine champion was dead. The impossible had happened. The Philistines stared in shock, then panic swept over them. Without their champion, they lost heart. They turned and fled. The men of Israel, filled with sudden courage, gave a mighty shout and charged after them, driving them back and claiming victory. In the center of it all stood David, the shepherd boy who trusted God. He had no sword, no armor, and no military training. But he had faith, and faith was enough. The story of David and Goliath is not just about a giant defeated long ago. It is about the battles we face today. Our giants may not be 9 feet tall with spears and armor, but they are real. They may be fears, doubts, temptations, struggles, or challenges that feel impossible to overcome. Like Israel, we may be tempted to shrink back in fear, but David shows us another way. He teaches us that true courage does not come from strength, weapons, or numbers. It comes from trusting the Lord. David believed that the battle belonged to God, and he stepped forward with that confidence. So what are the giants in your life? Perhaps it is fear of failure. Perhaps it is a habit you cannot break. Perhaps it is uncertainty about the future. Whatever it may be, remember this: you do not face it alone. The same God who gave David victory is the same God who is with you today. When you feel small, remember that David was small too. When you feel unprepared, remember that David had only a sling and stones. What mattered most was not his size, his skill, or his weapons. What mattered was his faith in the Lord Almighty. David's story calls us to trust God with our battles, to stop measuring the size of our problems against ourselves, and instead measure them against God. For no matter how great the challenge, God is greater still. The battle belongs to the Lord, and with him victory is certain.